Good afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Thank you guys for tuning in. As you guys all know, I am your host, Casty Streeter, and welcome to the Cast podcast. I'm not gonna lie, I was reluctant to come on stream today, but then I was like, even though it has all to do with last night and what happened to my probably the player I've been following the longest, the one that I've seen the most games of, and one of my QBs that I've admired for a very long time, Aaron Rodgers. I just want to make it clear, if you think that the Jets, were wrong in thinking that, it was a good idea to trade for Rodgers and that they should have Super Bowl hopes, you know, I don't even think it should go into the picture that this is a guy who is on the cusp of retiring, decided to come back, say, let's go to the best situation that we possibly can. And ultimately his season ends and, and doesn't even have the chance to, get forced off the field, with a fourth down. Doesn't see a fourth down, which, is beyond sad to me. Last night I didn't even get to tune in. I didn't even get to see Rodgers line up. I'd kind of lost track of time, to be honest with you. And by the time I tuned in, I was like, Zach Wilson is in. And I was like, what? And looking it up, it's like, oh, Rodgers got hurt. And I mean, at that point, we didn't know whether, it was an Achilles tear or anything like that. But they had said that the test had come back negative, which I find crazy. But my condolences to him wanting to go for a title. I don't think it's selfish at all what he did. I really think that if given the choice, he would have ended his career with the Packers. I think that the timing, as I've told many others before, that I think the timing was just off with Green Bay, that they wanted to look to the future, which, all things aside, I mean, obviously, if the Packers had known that Love was going to play the way he did on Sunday, given it's one game, I think it would have been a lot easier for them to get, to pass on Rodgers a little bit earlier. But who's to say that, the Love that we would have seen last year, if the Packers had decided to trade Rodgers last season after back-to-back MVPs, would have been the same, because they obviously brought on Clemens. But enough about, retrospect about what could have been, what would have happened. The league is going to miss Rodgers. It's not just the Jets, who I'm sure, are very sad about it. I'm sure the Packers, are sad, it's gonna be a sad, thing. And I'm sure, they're gonna ask like Love and, some other players about what they think. And it's like ultimately, and everybody still is gonna admit that they have nothing but respect for Aaron and all of that, and that it's gonna put a damper on just about every player in the league, because everybody knew Rodgers. And as far as I'm concerned in the league right now, he is like the most senior player almost, being that he's going to turn 40 in December. And he's obviously been in the league since 05, and you got guys, that had retired last year, like Ryan Brady. I'm trying to think of anybody else, but it's, really sad for me to think that it's like his season is already over with only one pass attempt. And what looked promising, with a large run from Breece Hall. And I just, I do just think that it's like, maybe they should have leaned on the run a bit more, because that still seemed to be, their strong suit, later in the game. I mean, you look at Zach Wilson, he didn't play terribly coming in. which, maybe it's a good sign. Maybe just one, whole preseason with Rodgers, because he did have, a preseason joint practice with Rodgers and the Jets years ago. Where he obviously admires Rodgers, and I mean, they brought Rodgers in to kind of help and hopefully develop Wilson a little bit. And I mean, he can still be there. He can still set an example. But the fact that he's not playing and it's forcing Wilson to come up prematurely, who knows what's going to go on with that team? Who knows if, they still have hopes. Because, I mean, I'm not going to lie. When I tuned in, Wilson threw a really bad pick. And I was like, this looks really bad. Like, if this is what you get from Wilson, but maybe it was a wake-up reminder, because then he was 14-21, to close the game out and give them obviously a shot at victory, albeit how, fortunate they were that Allen had so many turnovers. And I mean, it's always good to get a win. You can't diminish that. But that division that they're in, I still think, you got teams like the Dolphins and the Bills, who it's like should be the front runners still, especially with Rodgers going out and that sort of thing. But yeah, I feel really bad for the Jets. I feel like some things that I've heard, that it's like you should never bank on an old aging player, and it's like, culture is the one thing that I'll say about this, is that culture is never easy in the league, and it is what defines the great teams. And Saleh, to me, is a Super Bowl coach. He's a good coach. He's had to already deal with, so much QB adversity. And it's like, that was besides the O-line, which obviously it's like, the crazy thing to me is that, Rodgers may not decide to come back next year, depending on how bad his rehab is and how bad his injury is. Because, obviously at his age, to have, a season-ending injury, it's just not a good thing, But Saleh is a Super Bowl winning coach in my eyes. The only weaknesses on the team coming into this year were the O-line and, quarterback before they got Rodgers. And, they got Rodgers because he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. He has been not his whole career. You can't, I remember better than most than that the first season of Rodgers in Green Bay. They were 6-10. People were like, yeah, it's the doomsday. We're not going to be in contention for a while as long as Rodgers is the QB, because he looked extremely mediocre his first season. And now, he's obviously a bona fide Hall of Fame, QB, first ballot, where it's not even a question. I just don't see him wanting to step away. And obviously in the offseason, it's like he said that, like, the Jets gave up a lot to get me. So he didn't think it would be fair for him to retire after 1 year. Obviously, he had no idea that it's like his season would be one of the shortest ever lived. How many players can you say were injured on the first three plays of any season? But yeah, my condolences with Rodgers, the Jets, and even the entire NFL fan base, because, you never know if it's going to be a guy on your team who's missing the season. You never know if it's going to be, nobody's franchise QB should ever get hurt this bad, in my opinion. And it is one of the reasons why you just, they protect QBs. Some could say that it's become a baby's game, but it's like, to win because of, QBs getting hurt. Look at the Niners. The Niners last year did not deserve to be knocked out the way they were, because Purdy gets hurt, the backup gets hurt, and they ultimately can't have a guy to start. And it becomes one of the biggest, buffoonery of a games, Eagles, Niners, where it's like, it takes away from the game and it leads to perspective of, oh, you guys like fluked your way to the Super Bowl, and it diminishes the greatness of the game. I don't care about a player's character. In terms of this, I care about their talent. There's a lot of, viewpoints about Rodgers that he's, entitled. He embellishes how, important he is, how, maybe even entitled, some people think of him, and it's like the dude is one of the fiercest competitors I've ever seen. It's like when he was under McCarthy, he always found ways to win near the end of, McCarthy's tenure, and many people, said that, yeah, he tried to get McCarthy fired, but it's like, ultimately, you get older, you become, it's harder and harder as you get older to shoulder the weight on your back. I mean, it's just a true hard fact of life, especially in football. And I mean, Rodgers was able to do it because of his spectacular, throw on the run, his crazy arm talent, where it's like he can throw it, 80 yards, in a flick of his wrist, and his great vision and determination to like never give up on a play. But I think with that, I'm going to conclude, my Rodgers segment on that. And we're going to move on to analysis. So I do believe, we should start off with this game. And I'm not really going to look at the Jets. I mean, I guess I'll quickly look over the Jets. Obviously Zach Wilson had a pick very early in one drive, and then he went 14-21 for 140 yards, averaging 10 yards a catch. Isn't bad. But you look at, the running backs. Obviously, this team brought in Dalvin Cook. And obviously, this team also has Breece Hall, which I was curious to see what was going to happen. I thought the reason they brought in Dalvin Cook was mainly because, Breece Hall might be hurt. He might be hurt longer. I didn't really check up on whether he was going to be here, but obviously this is a talented, running back room. I think even Michael Carter is still a reasonable backup. Obviously not great. They wanted either more depth or more talent. They were really trying to load in case, something should happen to any of these backs, so that they have, at least one home run hitter with Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook. And Breece Hall comes back stronger than ever, dominates, the run game. And Dalvin Cook, I mean, this is a pretty, a below average thing for him. He's a spectacular back, really good eyes, really good shiftiness, really good elusiveness. And I mean, I would be lying if I wasn't saying that I was glad that he was off the Vikings because of, the Packers having to deal with him. Like, I think the Vikings were fools to have gotten rid of him, to be honest with you. But only time will tell with that. And we'll get to the Vikings game later. The receiving, a good amount of spread on this. Not crazy spread, but you look at Garrett Wilson, perfect on all of his catches. The only wide receiver with, targets of 5 and 5 catches, and then Dalvin Cook, the running back, obviously. But you also, you don't have very much here. But then again, in terms of the fact that you have Zach Wilson, one coming in, super early after this emotional, injury, and then being able to, essentially rally and keep it together. And especially going after adversity, where it's like he threw a terrible pick, never should have thrown the ball there. And from what I could tell, he wasn't even under that much pressure, and it was just a terrible read and a terrible, pass. I don't know what you could say, was going on with him. Jordan Whitehead having a coming out game, I think, where it's like 3 interceptions, 3 passes deflected. It's crazy to me that he did this well, because usually when you think of, obviously he was the, safety last year, but, you think about, the more veterans on the team, you would think that like Sauce Gardner, would have been one of the guys with more picks, but maybe he just wasn't getting, the balls thrown his way like it was last year. And it's like, and then you have Adrian Amos, who is the, senior safety on this team at this point. But yeah, crazy game from him. They were obviously getting pressure on Josh Allen, with a good amount of sacks, and that sort of thing. And then Zuerlein being, automatic, like I think he should be. He's been in the league a long time and definitely was their clutch player. Scoring 10 of their points before, the 6 here. So it's, or no, what am I saying? 10? Oh yeah, 10 of their points. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I just totally had a brain lapse there, because they had 1 extra point and 9 points off of field goals. But, a great game from him. Obviously, the thing that you see with the Bills is that Allen, 3 picks, 2 fumbles, otherwise 29 of 41. This is, highly efficient besides the 3 picks. And I mean, James Cook was, running the ball pretty well. From what I saw from him, he was looking fresh. He was, doing really well. And then, of course, you have all reliable Stefon Diggs, who had the one and only touchdown from Allen, 10 yards, just a little over 10 yards, a reception, on 13 targets. And I mean, I guess the rest of the thing is it's like they kind of brought in Kincaid, so hopefully he would become a second option. Obviously, catching a lot of shorter balls, type of thing. But Dawson Knox also still getting his targets. Because I think that this tandem and the fact that, Gabe Davis is definitely their wide receiver too. I think that you have these two and Kincaid and Knox, and that's your primary receiving core. Besides, dropping it to the tailback, James Cook. And I mean, you look at this, I mean, Greg Rousseau had a good game, a forced fumble, which is really good. He's a young player that needs to step up for them. And I mean, Josh Allen, though, 2 fumbles, 5 turnovers total. If one of these, one of his picks, it was in the red zone later in the game. If they have that field goal, it probably doesn't go to overtime, type of thing. Because the, as you could see here, you have, a field goal. You have a field goal from the, a touchdown. Okay. Or no, a field goal. Okay. It was a field goal here. It was a 30-yard field goal. If the Bills had 3 more points, it would have had to have been a touchdown. Buffalo Mike Hyde was injured. I hope he's all right. That's another big blow, for the Bills. And I mean, he's a really good safety. And I mean, they even had Poyer injured last year, which really, their team was really diminished last year. But yeah, ultimately, the thing about the Bills to me that hurts them the most is that they don't force enough pressure, or they didn't last year, and they were really hurting, at least when Von Miller went out. And, overall that just hurt them really, really bad. So looking at that, it's like, you need to force pressure. They obviously forced, a decent amount of pressure on, Zach Wilson when he was in. Obviously, Leonard Floyd had 1 whole sack on Rodgers, and that's what injured him. It didn't look like it was vicious at all either, so how could Leonard Floyd have known that? And he's never been known to be a dirty player. Just a very highly motivated player that has, produced on just about every team he's been on as a journeyman. But overall, the one thing we learned from this game is that I think the Jets can run the ball. I think they're going to have to. Zach Wilson is obviously way more mobile than Aaron Rodgers, but you don't want him having to force because he's scrambling and he feels like he has to, make a play type of thing. They really need to instill that, I think, in him. But, even the interception he threw was just, a terrible read, and he wasn't really under that much pressure. But yeah, the Bills, they need to stop having these collapses. Otherwise, they are going to lose so many games in the AFC, because the thing about the AFC is that it's better QB play. And once you're in the postseason, if you're having collapses like this, you're ultimately just you're not gonna win or get to the Super Bowl, which the Bills, they could still get to the Super Bowl, I'm pretty sure. Allen showed that he's still, very accurate, very concise with throwing the ball. But, Buffalo, really, really crazy to me. Like, I went to bed thinking like, oh man, this is going to be a wash. This is going to be one of those games where it's like, it doesn't prove anything besides the fact that the Jets, they were all in on Rodgers. And it's like, but yeah, Allen, late game, it wasn't even like a late game breakdown. If you look at this, it's, you look at this, it's like second quarter interception, did rebound with a touchdown, this interception, type of thing. And then, you have the end of the half and you have another interception off your first one, a punt, an interception, the fumbles, two fumbles, late in the game. Wait a minute. Where was the first fumble? Am I losing it? Fumble. All right, this is really bizarre to me. I thought that, I definitely thought that there was another fumble. There is, isn't there? Yeah, Josh Allen had 2. Oh, they only lost 1, but yeah. When you obviously have one of these where it's like you get it back, usually it just shows that, that team is probably losing a ton of yards, and it's going to lead to an eventual, not turnover on downs, but punt or something, and could take away from points you would have gotten. But yeah, moving on, I want to look at a couple of other games and tell my reactions about it. Because I'm definitely not going to do predictions today for next week. I do want to talk about Lions-Chiefs, even though it's almost been a week. This game, to me, was a game that showed that, they need Chris Jones, the Chiefs do. But they also need to clean up their wide receivers, because you look at Kadarius Toney and then even more, and they each had a drop that was crazy at the late parts of the game where it's like, this is a catch, it's free. You have Mahomes playing well. I'm not going to look at stats. The Lions, in my opinion, this doesn't really prove that much about them. They did show that they can run the football and that they have a really dominant O-line. But the other thing about that is that you had the benefit of the doubt from these guys just dropping passes. And then conditioning in week 1 is a thing. Your O-line is probably going to look a lot better against the run until teams know what you like to do. Especially with a rookie running back. I'm not taking anything against the Lions, rookie running back. But the thing about this game is that you look at, the Lions and you look at Gibbs. He only got 7 carries, Montgomery, and he had 6 yards a carry type of thing. But, David Montgomery carried the load. And 3.5 average is pretty good. But, looking at this team, they passed a crap ton. And Goff, wasn't, great. You kind of expect a little bit more from these guys. Like, Amon-Ra, I expect to have the most targets, but to only have 6 catches for 71 yards. With a guy like this who is such a good gadget player, so elusive, so good at creating space, like, nothing really flashed me about this game. it was the Chiefs' game to lose. Don't get me wrong, but they were without Kelsey. They were out without Chris Jones, which I predicted Chiefs, and the Chiefs. It's like they had scored even 3 more points. You're talking about the Lions team. That's like, oh yeah, there's no way that they win because they barely won otherwise, and it was because of drop passes, errors by the other team, not because of their own play. I think that makes this look like, this. It makes me think that it's like this game. You could talk about the Lions being very, held back. Especially with, the way that they played after the initial touchdown of Detroit, where they seemingly walked in and then they showed resilience the rest of the game. And it wasn't until their own play like erred them to a loss, because that's just the way the NFL is. Like, if you don't finish strong in the league, you're typically not winning, unless you just have an insane first half, which just doesn't happen very much. Like, after last year, it's like you've seen so many leads blown and whatever else in today's league that it's almost crazy how you have to always be putting essentially, you're a gun to the head to the other team, where it's like, you can't relent. You've got to, you can play with a different style, but you almost just want to, stay cruising the whole game, to keep your distance ahead of them. But, yeah, this game, it was such I wouldn't say it was a complete fluke, but it really shows that Kansas City just mental errors. Week 1 mental errors, because I just don't really think that that's a thing that happens. I just don't think that's a thing that happens again. Like, obviously the Lions and Chiefs aren't going to meet again this season, but crazy. Another game I wanted to look at was Browns Bengals, because I had this on while I was also watching Vikings Buccaneers. The Browns, I'm not going to lie, suffered from maybe almost the same thing, where they have no O-line, sorry. The Bengals defense, I think, played well enough, especially with, the Browns only got 24 points, and the thing about this is that you've got Deshaun Watson with a full off season under his belt with the team now, and I still wasn't too impressed. Like, I think that if you're getting to the QB that much and you're holding Burrow to 82 yards, where he's ultimately taken out because he's just going to get beat up out there, I don't know what to say. I think that the Browns, even though this kind of showed that they have a great pass rush, they've had that for years now. And teams figure out ways to, dip and dunk on teams like this, where it's like, yeah, you're going to have a great pass rush, but we're going to scheme around it later in the year, and I think if I were, looking at this game, you look at, the Browns, oh my goodness. You look at the Browns to me, and, Watson, this, with how much you have the ball, still at a pick, only 1 touchdown, not even 200 yards. And it's like, and you're able to, and they were able to run the ball. Obviously, Nick Chubb, great. Watson still shows that he can run it, great. But it's like Watson, a few years ago before this whole, Texans debacle, he was in MVP conversations next to Mahomes. I'll say it. He's, in terms of scrambling ability, he's obviously better than Mahomes. And in terms of precision, like, he carried the Texans when they were literally the worst team all those years. And they could still very well be the worst team, but probably not. Looking at this, I really think that the Browns, it's like, yeah, it's week 1. Oh, nobody's going to do too great type of thing. There were definitely players that did great. And it's like, you look at this and it's like, you're not going to be winning that much if your best receiver, which in my opinion, it's still Amari Cooper, is not even making 50% of his completions. And whether that's on him or whether it's on Watson, you need some chemistry there. But looking at this, you even had Watson with a fumble as well, so 2 turnovers, which is huge. And then, you do look at their secondary, and this is Za'Darius Smith is a linebacker, Newsome, great young corner, Denzel Ward, good corner, Grant Delpit, very physical safety. But, the thing about it is that even with all the pressure they were getting, you still only had Myles Garrett, who, you could argue is the best pass rusher in the league next to Nick Bosa, And I think it's insane that it's like, they were getting pressure on Burrow all game, but it's like they only had two official sacks the whole game, type of thing. But it's a good win for the Browns, obviously. They need this, especially when it's like a team like the Bengals, who usually pick up the heat later in the year. Like, I don't know if the Bengals are if it's just a thing that had to do with Burrow being, having an injury this preseason, so he just didn't really practice all too much. But like, you'd think after him seeing the way the Packers defense was in practice, because the Packers D even had more pressure, like they were the second highest pressure in the league after the Cowboys. In the first week of, you would have thought that it's like, oh, maybe he would have, a little bit more like vision or cognitive thought about how quick he would need to play. Obviously, you think about the Packers and they don't really have a pass rusher on the caliber of Garrett. Like Rashawn Gary's good, but he's coming off of injury. We'll see if he's, good the whole season. But you look at the Bengals and it's like, the mental aptitude of Burrow and how sharp he is once you get like to the middle of the season. You just wouldn't think that he would be this ill-prepared mentally, going up against a pass rush like this. And it's a team in his division that he knows, what their strengths are, and a player like him who it's like, yeah, he's the top paid, just because he came in the league a little bit later than Mahomes. But it's like, I just think that Burrow would, be better in his first game. That's just my opinion. I know it's a little harsh probably, but, great QBs learn to improvise. Look at Mahomes. He's considered the greatest, and look at where he is. He's the best improviser in the league currently. Going back to scores, we're gonna look at Vikings Buccaneers. Here is what I'll say about this game and what it kind of proves that the Vikings are very similar to the way that they were last year. Here is what I think. You look at the Vikings, you look at how many yards Kirk Cousins threw, obviously 33 of 44. Had just some ones really get away from him late in the game. It's what I've said about Kirk. It's why I think the Vikings are not going to re-sign him, is that when the pressure is on him to perform, no matter who it is, he is a choke artist. And you cannot win in this league, especially come postseason or in any sort of prime game, when your QB cannot overcome his own nerves. He has been in the league long enough now to where, what is he, like 34 years old? He's 35 years old now. He ain't getting any younger. He's, definitely getting less mobile. I don't think Kirk really runs the way he does anymore. He's getting way too old. And you also have, Alexander Madison, who was apparently supposed to be just a fine replacement for Cook. That's why they were like, we believe in Addison. That's why we're going to get rid of Cook. Type of thing. Really average. 3 yards a carry. 3 and, 1/10 of yards a carry about, and they only ran him 11 times. And then, you have Ty Chandler. Don't even know who this guy is. Is he a rookie? Probably. No, he's a 2-year rookie who they barely ran, and that sort of thing. But very porous run game. And all that they're screaming is that they are going to pass every single down, and you look at this, obviously 14 designed runs. So it's like they're not running the ball, 14 designed runs, where it's like, if you look at this, and you take 14, divided by, 34 yards divided by 14, averaging the totals, you are averaging a porous amount of run game. As far as I'm concerned, you know what this looks like to me? I remember last year with Tom Brady. People kept harping on Brady. Brady isn't clutch anymore. Brady wasn't playing well. Well, guess what? He had 0 run game. Like, Leonard Fournette had like a 2-something yard average. You cannot win in today's league without a running attack. I do not care. If you are the Vikings head coach, gosh, I'm trying to remember his name right now. You need to realize that you cannot be this stubborn and only rely on your best weapon, Justin Jefferson. Obviously they brought in Jordan Addison, who's their, rookie that's supposed to help carry the load type of thing. But, even it's like, looking at this, it's like 6 targets for 4 catches for 61 yards, and then Hawkinson, who many expected to make a leap this year. Yeah, it's a good, target to come to reception percentage, but it's 35 yards on 8 catches. I'm going to criticize the Vikings because I really think that, they're doomed to go on a path where they are not that good of a team this year. Just judging from this game, and it's like, putting all your eggs in a basket in Kirk Cousins, who the crazy thing about it is that Kirk is playing for a contract. There was an article, in the spring where once the Vikings were, gone and eliminated, that Kirk had apparently, asked the Vikings if they could talk about a new contract because he wants to be with the team. Who wouldn't when you have the best young wide receiver in football, and potentially in a couple years he'll be the best wide receiver in football? The only reason I don't say that is because you've got guys like Tyreek Hill, who, after the first game this year, obviously he's going to get kind of milked the ball, but he, is an insane speedster with a lot more, I wouldn't say deep ball potential, but he's got a lot more elusiveness, a lot more quickness to him to make him, do multiple things, where it's like, if you're going to pass it short to Jefferson, yeah, he's going to get catches, but he's not as elusive or as quick as Tyreek. And then, you still have who I think is still probably the most complete wide receiver, Davante Adams, because he not only has, insane route running, but he has some of the surest hands in the league. And he's still, up there in age. He's getting up there in age, and he's still performing at that level, and he's done it for a long time. And he's also a better touchdown threat. Jefferson last year didn't even surpass, in my eyes, in order to prove that you are a great wide receiver, you not only have to get a good amount of yards, but you've got to consistently get 10-yard touchdown seasons. Which, if you look at Adams, he's done, season from season. And last year he proved that it's like, oh, he doesn't need Rodgers. He's not necessarily a product of Rodgers. And that even though Derek Carr and the team had a abysmal year, Davante Adams still had like 1,400 yards with, a good number of touchdowns. I can't remember exactly how much, but I think it was like, it was definitely above 10. Which is the only thing that I think is holding Jefferson back. Last year, he had, he didn't have that many touchdowns. And I'm sorry, but it's like, if you're going to be a top wide receiver in this league, you've got to be able to get touchdowns. you can have, games here and there where it's like you don't have one, but it's like, come postseason, you're going to be the main guy that's going to have to rise above all of it. And if you can't do it consistently in regular season, because obviously, Jefferson hasn't had that much he hasn't had much postseason time because the Vikings haven't won a postseason game, I'm pretty sure since they drafted him. Because Kirk just doesn't do well in the postseason. And the formula for the Vikings is a problem. Many people were saying that the Buccaneers were a bottom 5 team. And yes, they kind of, probably played better. And they got some gimmies from Kirk where it's like, yeah, he threw it bad, but he's done that a lot. It's a trend with, Cousins, and I don't think it's going to break, the older he gets. And it's like, yeah, looking on the flip side of this, it's like, let me see this. You have, a good amount of passes deflected, but, they really couldn't get after, Baker. Only 1 sack from Danielle Hunter, your best pass rusher. And it's like, you had a good amount of penalties too. I remember Dean Lowry, a face mask that he did, and you just had a team that it's like, how are the Vikings going to function? And it's like I said, from Baker, a very modest first game, but he also did run and was balling for first downs, and he was definitely probably the star of this team on offense, in my opinion. You obviously had Mike Evans doing some good things, Chris Godwin with a clutch game-ending catch, but otherwise, this team won by the skin of their teeth. But yeah, they look like a team where it's like you don't. Teams shouldn't lose to this, especially a division winner in the Vikings from last year. And many people are saying that the Vikings are still good. They could still win the North, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that this team holds a candle to the Lions the way they played, But, time will tell. It's week 1. But yeah, overall, I think abysmal. Like Kirk, in my opinion, goodness, you're 35 years old now. Yeah, the crazy thing to me is that it's like, I feel like he's the kind of guy that it's like is going to try to keep playing as long as he can, but he just, I don't know. He just is the same old Kirk from what I've seen after one game. Another game I want to talk about. Let me see here. We'll definitely talk about this. The Packers and the Bears. I'm not going to sugarcoat my team's performance. It is great to me the way we played. We played with a lot of energy, a lot of zeal. Jordan Love, this isn't the prettiest first game stat line. Like you'd like his completion to be a little bit higher, but no picks, and then that sort of thing. And then you had Aaron Jones, who it's like ultimately, gave them kind of the momentum to win the game. Obviously he did really good in the first quarter. Then they didn't utilize him, I think, at all in the second. And Agent Dillon obviously got a lot of carries. I don't know if they're trying to see if they have something here or whether they're trying to determine whether they want to keep Dillon or if that's just the game plan. Maybe they want to change the pace it too much, but maybe they need to realize that, you use AJ Dillon to close games because obviously, and I mean, Jones's was just a tweak in his leg, after he turned it up. I guess he was the third. I saw a thing that he was the third fastest player on Sunday after Tyreek Hill, of course. Like I was just saying about the whole speed thing. Tyreek was crazy fast on a couple of his breakaway ones. And then Aaron Jones, even though he's like 29 years old now, it's like still, has, really good speed. And I think it's deceptive speed. I think that players always underestimate how quick he really is. And he really showed it off of the option play was the play that he had the top end speed on. But I guess another thing is that they had Patrick Taylor in there, which is a little bit of a surprise because Patrick Taylor didn't make the initial 53. But looking at this, I'm really glad with our run game besides AJ Dillon. I don't know why AJ Dillon struggled so much. I think it's I don't understand why. It's almost like they know we're gonna run when they put him in, and it's like I feel like his vision just isn't where Jones's is, or he's just not as patient, or it's just because he's not as explosive. I mean, you need chemistry with the line. The line, it did a great job, obviously protecting and run blocking when it worked. But then there was, times with Dillon that it's like he got contact very early on. And yeah, he's big, but it's like if you don't have any momentum, it's harder to get going when you're, when you're hit at the line or a little bit behind the line to, gain any sort of momentum to gain yards, But you look at the receptions. We obviously didn't have Christian Watson. He's out with an injury. I was really happy with Dobbs. I think that he's coming along nicely. I thought that last year that he would be doing this sort of stuff with Rodgers, but the contested catch in the end zone was really good, as well as the route running and his separation on his initial one where, I'll give most of the credit to Love on that one because he looked to the right, he stared him down on the right-hand side, and then delivered a laser to Romeo Doubs on that. And, it's something you expect from a veteran, and it's like, Love is in his 4th year, but he doesn't have the playing time to really, back up that he should be playing like this consistently yet. If he keeps on doing it, that's great. He could very well, I don't want to speak too soon, but Love could be in the MVP conversation if he plays like this. I mean, if you're getting 250 yards a game and 3 touchdowns a game with, one turnover here or there, because I'm sure it's going to happen. I hope it never happens, but that's unrealistic in today's league and with how opportunistic, defenses are. And obviously looking at the Bears, this looks like a horrendous loss to them. I don't want to completely shit on them, but they were, there was a lot of rumors saying that, Justin Fields was going to be great this year. And I will say this, he was under pressure a lot. You can't expect your QB to really do too well, even with how mobile he is and how elusive he is. Eventually he's just going to tire out, because he's built to be able to pass it sometimes. He's not built like a wide receiver where he's running all the time, But, yeah, what a game. I'm really happy with what happened, I guess. I kind of wish that Luke Musgrave had a TD. Obviously, one of these that it's like he was wide open, he tripped over himself. But a good opening game for the rookie. Obviously, you had other players like Malik Heath and Dontayvion Wicks didn't get their catches, but I'm pretty sure the ones that were targeted to them were kind of just throwaways anyway. And were a little off target because Love, while I have a lot of praise for him, there were definitely some of the things that it's like he was off target. A couple of times it was like the wider, I remember when Musgrave, lost the ball and he ultimately just stumbled on himself, on one of the plays that, you think that would have been a touchdown as well. But, I liked how the offense operated without Watson. The one thing I will say is I wish Jaden Reed had, been able to catch, some more balls. I'm glad he was grabbing his knee. I was literally fearing the worst at that point because he kind of just showed it. He can jump and make contested catches. Like that vertical he did, I was like, geez, that's, insane. You kind of see these guys, that are insanely athletic, but you don't really see them jump that high in game to go for a catch. But, glad we dodged a bullet there. And the composure of Love, his post-game press conference, I think that he wasn't even, it's kind of hard to say that he wasn't too excited about it. But I mean, he did say he was tired. I don't know. It's funny. Obviously, first game fatigue is a thing. Having to keep your mental in the whole game. It's like, without making a mistake. Which ultimately, one mistake here in this game probably wouldn't have mattered too much if it was late in the game. But you never know. I mean, if it had happened in like the second quarter where they just had a lull and that sort of thing, you could have had the Bears having the lead and having the momentum late in the game to where it's like, you never know what's going to happen. And I will say this about the Bears. It's like, you go, you get DJ Moore. It's crazy to me that Ja actually did like blanket him and ultimately just smother him to the point where he was suffocated for yards. 2 catches for 25 yards, type of thing. But, on a side note, I think that, the defense played really well. I think that they caught Quay Walker on like a play or something, Fields did, where he was just kind of like aloof and not covering anybody in his zone. But, he ultimately showed that he was a really stout run defender. The pick, in my opinion, it's like, I think that Fields just didn't see him, even though Quay's a huge guy, But you look at this team and you look at the way Keyshawn or Rasul Douglas played, contested end zone catch, type of thing. I think that Darnell Savage proved that he can be every bit what the Packers anticipated, years ago when they drafted him. Downhill, great run support. He's not even that big of a guy, but very crafty. I think that they could use Darnell Savage, maybe not as a box safety or anything like that, just because he lacks the size. But it's just with his speed, he's able to cover so much, And then you obviously have, guys like Devontae Wyatt, second year, 26 years old, or he's going to be 26, this year, doing really, really well. And that sort of thing. And that's what, that's one of the reasons why they were okay with letting him go. And, Van Ness showing that even though with how fast Fields was, this beast of a player, also known as Hercules, just goes to show you that this guy, he's a special player. Very fast, very strong. Honestly, I'm not going to make this comparison yet, but it's like he looks a little bit like Nick. Maybe he's a faster Nick Bosa, He's obviously a lot taller. I think he's a lot taller than Bosa is. Maybe not, but what a great big talent, he is. And just a very, very good, all-around defensive performance where it's like the only thing that I would like to get better about this defense is maybe they get Eric Stokes back and they're able to blanket wide receivers better. Not to say that Keyshawn Nixon and Rasul Douglas are, not adequate, but, I was wondering how Keyshawn Nixon would do, just because last year he didn't really play slot corner that much on the team. He was mainly, the return man that we brought in. But also props to Daniel Whelan, the first Irishman to play in the NFL since, God, was it 1985? I'm pretty sure. So, gosh, crazy number of years for an Irishman to not be in the league. And I think that they were saying during the game that this guy was like folding towels or something in California before the Packers, found him, brought him in, and ultimately kept him, as their punter. And good leg on him. And he showed that he can at least hit within the 10-yard line. I think he just needs to work on his backspin a little bit. But yeah, the other thing too, Whelan, hitting, or not Whelan, oh my gosh, sorry. Carlson hitting a 52-yarder looked like it was a banger. It wouldn't have been something I would have expected him to make at the beginning of training camp, but he seems to have cleaned up his kicking quite a bit. I will say that my sister, was paranoid seeing him, because a couple of his extra points, it's like, oh yeah, he's curving this thing like a golf ball, but great performance from him. Looking at the Bears, like I said about Fields, he would have had a pretty good game, without the interception and that sort of thing. But it's like decent completion percentage, nothing insane. But, him on his legs doing really, really well. Khalil Herbert, pretty good. Foreman was a really real shocker to me how he was doing. But otherwise, this isn't what you expect from the wide receiver core. Darnell Mooney leading with 53 yards. And then, 4 guys above DJ Moore, and it's like, this isn't. And then the other thing too, Chase Claypool, doing really, really porous, when he's such a big target, should be really good for, should be really good for Justin Fields. Like, if you can scramble really well, that's one reason why Rodgers, it was really good for Rodgers. You can typically aim, these balls to where the defender's not going to have a shot at it with bigger guys. And Claypool has a really big frame. He's pretty fast for his height too. Not the fastest 6'4" guy I've ever seen, but like good speed, But a couple of things too, as I saw Claypool, it's like it looked like he wasn't really in run support very much, and sometimes they do these quick outs, and Claypool just looked like a turnstile for the defense. I remember, I think it was Keyshawn Nixon ran right by him and blew up one of these plays for a huge loss. And that's just not going to put even more pressure on your quarterback, So hopefully someone gets on Claypool's ass, lights a fire under him, because he just looked, I don't know, he looked like a detriment to the team when it's supposed to be him, Mooney, and DJ Moore are their 3 best wide receivers, in my opinion. Otherwise, looking at their defense, Tremaine Edmonds played well. This doesn't surprise me. He's a very good middle linebacker. It surprised me that the Bills wouldn't bring him back. Jaquan Brisker, their young safety, playing very, very well. Yannick Ngakoue doing, Yannick Ngakoue things. I think that, he's potentially found a home here and that sort of thing. But crazy to me, like that, the Bears talk so much shit, and then they ultimately, goodness, they started off the game well, they were trading blows with the Packers, and then ultimately just, deteriorated and that sort of thing. And they were obviously playing with, with fire, going for it on, 4th down, where it's like, oh man, you just look like you're up against a team that's ready to get physical, has a very stout D line and linebacker core, which I definitely think is it's crazy to say, but I think the strength of this team is the linebackers and the D line now. Even though the D line is shallow, they all produced. They all did well against the run. They all affected, what the Bears were trying to do. And then you have the pass rush. They had so many different guys. I was having a hard time keeping track on the Packers. And it's like I said with Fields, he, for how much he was pressured, he played very well. The interception, he just didn't see Quay, I'm pretty sure. But it's crazy because the Packers had the highest pressure rate only behind the Cowboys. So the Cowboys, it's almost like they played against a porous offensive line where 2 guys on their line, literally, both tackles, got graded super low when you wouldn't have expected it, We're going to move on to that game in a second. I think that might be the last game I talk about because I didn't really watch too many other ones. So we got, Bears, Packers. Oh, here's another game I do actually want to talk about that I completely forgot about. Or, maybe we'll have a few more games. I think we'll have a few more games that we talk about. I'm not going to mention too much. But you look at the Raiders-Broncos game. This is eerily similar to last year, where their offense just cannot produce points. I'm pretty sure last year, like 11 weeks in, there were things going on about that if the Broncos had only scored 18 points or something in the first 11 games, they would have been 10-1, only having lost one. And I'm pretty sure that was like the Seahawks week 1. Here they go up against the Raiders, where it's like you have, one of the best young corners in the league, Surtain, going up against Davante Adams. And, you match up, pretty well. Because you have a stout defense, and the Raiders, I mean, I'm not saying that they don't have a defense, but the best part about this team is their offense. Or at least it was last year. Last year, the defense was lost on the Raiders. Looking at the Raiders, you've got Jimmy G running. Crazy, right? Jimmy G's old. What is this guy? He's like 33 or 34. Oh, he's 31. But this guy is is like a miniature Tom Brady. The dude doesn't run. I would look up his 40 time, but it's like, who cares? But yeah, he was running, and it's like he wasn't even always sliding at the end. Played with heart, really showed that he could still, get it done. And 20-26, it's exactly what I, expect from a QB like him. Because as you aren't a scrambler, that sort of thing. But it's like you have Josh Jacobs, he ran it, 20 times, a good balanced attack, here. But not very good run game, which is interesting to me. I mean, Josh Jacobs, wanted a bigger, more money because they weren't willing to offer him because of the running back market type of thing. But it's like this game, I mean, you look at this and it's like the Broncos, the Broncos were up, 14-10, end of the half, missed field goal. Would have, this would have won them the game, obviously, if it had played the exact way, at the end. But it's like, you look at this and it's like, goodness. Like, goodness, why would the Broncos be so bad at being able to, win? It's like obviously Davante Adams, it's like only had 66 yards. Jacoby Myers, 81 yards. Not an insane passing day at all. Really, like, only 3 guys really the main focal point. And it's like, can you even consider the 3 targets to Jacobs or like that focal? And I mean, Garoppolo with a fumble that they got back, it's kind of crazy. I heard that Russell Wilson didn't play too bad. I wouldn't say he's fixed, though, because it's like if your defense is holding a team to this low of points, there's no reason you should lose. Obviously, look at the Raiders on the flip side, and they held the Broncos to this many points, but it's like your team had 14. Your team had 14 points, right? And it's insane to me. It's insane to me. You obviously had a missed extra point. But it's like you also got rid of McManus on the Broncos. And when someone told me that they got rid of him for someone else, I was like, why? Why in the world? It's absolutely, it's absolutely appalling to me why, you would get rid of, one of your long-term staples who has been a fine and maybe not elite kicker, but he's been fine. I remember seeing McManus on a billboard in Colorado because that's where I reside. But it's like Russell Wilson only missing 7 passes. He only got 177 yards, which I think is kind of oddball. Like, this kind of reminds me of last year when, so the Steelers had Trubisky. They had drafted Pickett, but Trubisky was the starter at the beginning of the year, and he averaged an obscenely low average. for his passes because all he was dumping at every play. The thing about this is if the Broncos can't ever get the deep ball going, like maybe, Sean Payton does do a lot of short pass catches, but I don't think it's going to work the same way as when he was on the Saints. I'm not going to lie. I don't think that the wide receivers that the Broncos have are necessarily short ball home run receivers like he had in New Orleans. But, Javonte Williams, he had a 4-yard average. He had a pretty good game. They obviously didn't run it that much. I think that that's another thing, too. It's that, you can't throw this much. Yeah, the Raiders only got, 2 sacks or something, when we were looking at this. Let's look here. Again, you have 2 sacks. Tillery, and then, of course, Crosby, their best pass rusher. But it's you've got to be able to run the ball, as far as I'm concerned. I think that Russell, it's the fact that he threw this high of percentage, I would never associate this with that. It's but, maybe, the other thing, too, is that maybe the Raiders were just playing a soft coverage the whole game. Because they knew that, eventually, their defense was going to bend but not break or something like that. Because if you don't have any sort of threat where, the other team is going to, throw it into the end zone from deep, you don't have to. I mean, you can play, cautious and, bend but not break style. And it's just you look at this and it's which one of their wide receivers is going to be the guy that is going to be the guy, on this team. You think of Courtland Sutton, he's a pretty good one, but then you look at, the rest of the team, and it's I'm pretty sure that they traded for Mims. Or no, Marvin Mims, no, never mind, I take that back, but it's who on this team is going to be the guy? If you don't have that guy, I feel really stupid now. Is Jerry Jeudy not on this team anymore? He's the kind of guy that it's for the Denver Broncos, is he injured? He was out versus the Raiders. This is the only guy that I think, could be the guy. Courtland Sutton obviously proved that even when Judy's not in, he's not, he's not going to be able to do it, Yeah, he had a TD, but it's 32 yards. Show me more. And then Patrick Surtain, like I said, playing really well. Obviously matched up against, that sort of thing. But it's if your defense is playing this and giving you this many pass deflections, type of thing. And then it's yeah, they weren't really able to, I guess, sack. They weren't really able to sack, Russell Wilson was only sacked twice. But, yeah, they obviously weren't able to get to Jimmy G, who it's it's not going to get easier. Most QBs are more agile than Jimmy G was. But it's yeah, you bring in Lutz, who it's I definitely think is a step down from, I think he's a step down. It's he missed a field goal. His longest field made was 24. But it's the Broncos, to me, this looks just like last year. With obviously Russell, was getting sacked a lot more last year, but it's he obviously completed a higher percentage, but I think that's a product of the fact that you're on a team with a guy like Sean Payton who, Breeze was just exceptionally accurate in the short game. Not that he couldn't throw deep, but, they would hit you with, short dimes the whole game until you were playing them up close. And then it's and then you're trading into dangerous waters because Breeze could still throw it deep. Russell Wilson, to me, it's he doesn't really throw that good of a deep ball anymore. He doesn't really have the scrappy guys he did in Seattle, And it's they just don't really have that top guy. So it's I feel like he could get exposed even more. And the fact that, they played this way. It's like, I wouldn't be surprised if next week, who do the Broncos play? It's just like, looking at next week, they play the Commanders. Interestingly enough, it's another 4 o'clock game, but it's nuts to me. I mean, you think it looks to me like, if they're just not able to score, it's like the Commanders, had a kind of interesting game. I don't know what to really say about theirs because I didn't watch the whole thing. But, you look at this and you look at the Commanders, it's like they probably win that game just because the Commanders have so many unknowns and they could easily tank unless Sam Howell actually starts to really play like, oh, this guy is going to be our franchise QB. I just don't see it with the Commanders because they still have a pretty young team. Scary Terry is a really, scary wide receiver. I always hate, any team that goes up against him, he does pretty well and he doesn't even need a QB. So imagine if he had like a franchise or better QB. But looking at the Dolphins, it's like Denver, and it's at Miami. It's their first, it's their first away game because this last one is against the Raiders. And that's the thing too. You're playing at home. Goodness, Denver, you should win. You should be able to win at home. I'm sorry. Especially against, the Raiders, who so many people hate here. I mean, they hate just about everybody in the division, but like the Raiders and the Chiefs are like the most hated, I feel like. I don't feel like people hate on the Chargers as much. But yeah, the Dolphins, another AFC team that they're probably going to lose to, that they really like looking at this. Las Vegas, yeah, they've got, Devontae Adams, but you look at, the Dolphins, and they got Waddle and Hill, the cheetah. And then, your first, game that it's like, looks like a plausible win because plausible win, is maybe the Bears, but maybe not, because who knows if Jimmy G was running on you. And not that he had like some insane game, but it's like if he can run on third downs where he needs to get the first, just think of what Fields will do. He'll be, if everyone's covered on third, he's still going to be able to run because he's infinitely quicker than Garoppolo. And it's like, you look at Denver and goodness, this looks a lot like last year. I just don't know what to say about it. And it's like, Lord, what is wrong with you, Denver? Moving on. And I guess the crazy thing is the Commanders barely beat the Cardinals, so it's like, oh, the Cardinals, I do know they had like a defensive touchdown or something like that, but it's like, yeah, they which is pretty bad that they would have only scored like 9 besides that. I don't want to talk about Niners Steelers because I really think that like people were saying that the Steelers were a good team. This was a team last year that struggled mightily. They didn't really prove anything. They had a really good draft, in my opinion. But the Niners, it's almost like it's their revenge year for having such a crappy end to their season. And to be quite honest, they are my favorite. But, and especially since they, signed Bosa, so, they don't have to worry about that anymore. But the crazy thing about their team is that they are in win now mode because their cap situation is so asinine. I did not know this until like a week ago, but it's like you look at it this year and it's like they're barely spending anything on the cap. And then next year, they've got like 7 or 8 guys that each one is, easily above 10 million. Which, yeah, you have stars on your team, but it's like, 8 or 9 guys at that much. You're just not going to have very much depth. You're going to have a bunch of young players because you're going to end up having to either cut, restructure, or do, the Saints magic, as I like to call it. Because the Saints, it's like last year, they were 70 mil under or something. And it was asinine.
But moving on, the next game that I want to talk about is Dolphins Chargers. I did not really watch this game, but to me, it is so crazy to me, and I wanted to point this out, that you've got Tua that's essentially throwing almost, God, he's essentially throwing like 50%, and he got 466 yards. It is absolutely asinine to me. Like, obviously you have Tyreek Hill, who he's like, I want to be the first player to hit 2,000. Now I don't really think it's, obviously it's going to be like a challenge. He's definitely going to have the games where it's like he's not able to, move. And I mean, obviously this game is definitely an outlier because the story of the Chargers is that they have scored the most in like the last 2 or 3 years. But they also have the most points against. It's literally the tale of the best offense, which I think is, crazy to hear because it's been Herbert carrying them since he was drafted. Because, I mean, you got like Mike Williams injury problems. You've got Keenan Allen's injury problems. You obviously have Eckler, which is, a great compliment to a good quarterback, where it's like he's had probably better than he should in terms of that, just because of all the other guys getting injured, and he's super reliable. But you've got the speedy Dolphins, the fast as hell Dolphins, where it's like Tyreek Hill, Waddle, and then Tua, whether he can stay healthy. He even had a pick this game. I wonder if this is the most yards ever accomplished while having one turnover or something like that. Like, there's got to be some crazy stat for it or whatever else. Tua, I guess it's really, and I mean, he also had, one fumble loss, so 2 turnovers. I don't care if you have 2 turnovers, if you have, 466 yards. But I guess on the flip side of this, it low-key kind of looks like a Kirk Cousins stat where it's like, oh yeah, you have turnovers, but you have insane yards. But obviously he had more touchdowns than Kirk. And then you had 2 touchdowns by the Cheetah where it's like the dude was like, I think he had like 22 miles per hour or something. It was ridiculous. But getting this much, and I mean, I want to look at, I really want to look at time of possession on this thing. But it's like, look at the Chargers. They had literally 5 more minutes of possession. And goodness, they had like, and the same number of penalties. Sacks allowed, this is crazy. Interceptions thrown, fumbles lost. Points scored, it's insane to me. I do think that, like, if you have to put up 400 some yards to score, that many, touchdowns, and I guess we're not even looking at the rushing yards. Like, how many total rush yards do they have? Celine! Hey, stop! Celine, stop! Hey! Sorry about that, guys. But you look at this and it's like, 54, 65, you have 70 yards rushing. So you essentially have, over 500 yards, obviously, total. But and then you have, 2 turnovers. Teams aren't going to be able to produce 500 every single game. And then the fact is that, even though, let's look at the Chargers, even though they held Herbert to 228, at 1 TD, and then Eckler and Kelly, like, look at these crazy numbers. This is insane to me. You're not going to be a team like the Dolphins and be able to put up that many yards if you are given this much on the run. And people have said that it's like you have one of the best defenses or whatever, I guess, on the Dolphins. And it's like, you might have a lot of talent, but you can't hold anybody for shit. I'm just going to say it. It's like, wait, It's like you have Xavier Howard where is God, did they not have Ramsey playing? Is Jalen Ramsey not playing? So he's injured. And I mean, I guess, okay, that's nuts. I'm not going to lie, I did not keep up with that. But it's like, you traded for Bradley Chubb to help. This obviously didn't help. 1 tackle for loss, and then 1 tackle, 2 assists. But yeah, it's crazy to me how bad the defense is. You still have a really good corner in Xavier Howard. You still have, Eli Apple. I mean, yeah, he was on the Bengals and he was kind of a liability, but he's a pretty good corner. It's kind of crazy to me how bad your defense or how many points your defense can give up when it's like you're clearly getting to Herbert, a little bit. You have 3 sacks total. But yeah, this really does, makes me wonder what the what are these guys going to do on the Chargers? They obviously either need to fire their D coordinator or they need to do something. They need to completely revamp how they're playing. Because their speed kills you. I mean, most teams have some sort of speed in their wide receiver core. It's just speed wins. And it's like it's a quick scoring league. So you need speed. It's hard to play methodical football nowadays where it's like where you're solely depending on possession guys. Like you just don't see it anymore. And then the fact that Bosa and Mac have, no tackle for losses and no sacks. 3 tackles amongst, the 2 of them, no assists. It's crazy. But yeah, goodness, you have J.K. Scott, who it's like punts a lawn for 62 yards. Yeah, averaged 48.33. It's kind of crazy to me. Like, I don't understand this. I didn't watch this game, I'm not going to lie. But like, it was crazy to me that it's like you're the Chargers and you're still suffering from this. And it's like, you get a fumble on the first half, you have momentum, but then, a touchdown here, Eckler, and then a touchdown by Mostert. You have to punt, field goal, touchdown. Crazy thing is that Cheetah does. Here then punt, touchdown. You don't even have at this point the touchdowns that Tyreek Hill got. Then you have a field goal, then touchdown, and then interception. Right? Crazy here. And yeah, Josh Jackson, who, really, missed some time last year, but, was signed for some good money. That's a good thing, I guess. But then you have Hill for 35 yards. Then you have, another field goal. And then you have Hill for 4 yards here. And then you have a turnover on downs, here because you just can't get a drive going at all. And it's one of the sacks that, it's one of the sacks that, you wouldn't think you wouldn't think that, you wouldn't think would be at the end of the game because it's like, oh yeah, we have a chance to win, but we don't. So crazy there. I think that, you do need to do some bold things in order to make sure that if you're the Chargers, you're not giving up these insane amount of gains. The last game that I would really want to talk about, I'll mention briefly about the Cowboys-Giants. I don't think that Daniel Jones' struggles were his own, and people that are saying that he's overpaid and whatever else, it's because his 2 tackles, Andrew Thomas, and then is it Neal on the other end, played porous. They essentially let Micah Parsons run at Daniel Jones the whole night. And there isn't a QB in this league that is fast enough to get away from Micah Parsons. I wouldn't even say that Lamar Jackson has the speed and the acceleration necessary to just get away from Micah Parsons. Because he is a generational player and he's just insanely fast. That's all I'm going to say about this. I'll say that I don't think Dak did that well, based on how much he had the ball. Based on how dominant the defense was, like 40 points when the other team is skunked. I'm sorry, but in today's league, it's like you should be scoring 49. People might say that that's unfair. It's like, oh, they're not just going to keep on smothering them type of thing, but it's like the defense of the Cowboys scored 14. You take that away, and, it's 26 points, that the offense scored. That's a pretty average. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not like, oh yeah, the offense impressed us. But yeah, moving on, we're going to look at Rams Seahawks. I don't understand how the Rams last year had a down year. They obviously got creamed week 1 against the Bills, I remember last year. And then it's like, they didn't have Cooper Kupp either. And then you have Stafford, who it's like no touchdowns, no interceptions. But he had thrown a ton of picks last year. Partially to blame on him, but also because it's like he had no O-line last year. 20 different combinations or whatever the heck it was. Goodness. But yeah, Stafford played well. Especially considering that it's like he had 2 guys, Tutu Atwell, who it's like is a smaller guy. Puka Nacua, I'm not going to lie, I don't know who this is. Is he a rookie? Yeah, he's a rookie. A little bit of a taller guy. Went to BYU from Provo, Utah. Who knows where that is? But it's like crazy to me that it's like, I guess, Stafford trusts this guy. 15 targets. But props to the Rams for beating a team that I think nobody thought, they would be able to beat. Because like Seahawks were like, oh yeah, now we've got Jackson Smith, Njigba. Oh man, we already have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. We've got like what could be the best wide receiver core, in the league. But, they just didn't do very well. And it's like, obviously, this team didn't get insane pressure on Geno Smith. You look at Aaron Donald, you hold him to half a sack, and you're happy with that, as by most teams. But it's like you look at this, it's like if you're not able to contain the run or whatever, and it's like it is really sad with Cam Akers being, I think didn't he get hurt or something? Maybe I'm totally tripping. Maybe I'm actually like tripping or something like that. So nope, never mind. I don't know why I was thinking of Akers. I was thinking of Dobbins on the Ravens, who's out for the year. But yeah, you obviously have like a running back by committee now. Kyron Williams. I'm pretty sure this is also a younger player, but it's like, great change the pace on their backs and that sort of thing. Even though, Cam Akers obviously, was used in short yardage situations, still gets a touchdown. Then you got Kyron Williams with 2. Very good for them. The fact that Stafford, I guess, was able to run, and have a decent average, it's kind of mind-boggling to me as well. But Yeah, very solid game where obviously, Ernest Jones had a really good tackle for loss on the on the Seahawks and that sort of thing, but it crazy to me that it's like, you're a team like the Seahawks, so it's like I had them as pegged as like the second best team in this division, obviously only behind the 49ers. They have seemingly last year they seemed to make it where they turned the table forward where they're not in rebuild, and Geno Smith played really well. Maybe not this game, obviously 16-26 for 112, it wasn't his fault. You had Kenneth Walker, doing good things. Zach, this guy, I guess, didn't run it very much, but did some good things. Even Smith ran, and DJ Dallas, who I've always liked, did okay. But it's like, yeah, no receiving threat, It's kind of nuts to me how bad, this is that they didn't have. I mean, I guess they had Will Disley, catching it and that sort of thing. But, they just could not get anything going offensively. Like, it just looks to me like you just have a team where I just don't know what to think. It's like you have all these weapons, but you weren't able to put up any sort of yards. I mean, you obviously had a decent run game. How can you not get the pass game going? It's really peculiar. Otherwise, this was kind of the last game I was going to talk about. I don't really think, I'm going to go on about any of these other ones. I thought that it was it was refreshing to see the Patriots kind of do well, I think. The Patriots do well. The Eagles barely beating them where it wasn't, a completely clean game, even though the Eagles retained most of their talent. But overall, a very odd week one, I'll say. People did want to say that they don't want to see Giants Cowboys, and I do kind of agree. I feel like the Giants, are kind of on the up and coming, but but it's like, oh man, yeah, just have both games be New York prime time. But it's like the Giants, I just don't see them as like, a super prime team. I like their coach DeBoll, but I also just think that it's like you were weird. You're weird in the sense that you wanted, to pair them up against the Cowboys when their matchups have been one-sided. It'd be like the same thing almost as pairing Packers Bears on prime time when Aaron Rodgers has owned them for years, and now I guess Jordan Love, owns them. It's like the big brother in the division where it's like, no, this team just always has their number, no matter how much better they get. But that's kind of it for today. You guys can probably expect me to do the prediction stream on Saturday in the afternoon. So keep a watch out for that. But this is Cassidy Streeter on CastCast.